Hi guys, I'm Tammy K. Welcome to my channel, and today is number 3 of my beginner watercolor series. Today we are learning about different basic washes. We talk about ways to layer paint as well as different layers that we can add for texture in our watercolor paintings. So join me, we're gonna have so much fun. I'm glad you're here. Today, before we talk about washes and layers, let's talk about watercolor paper and what's available out there for you. So if you are a beginner, I recommend, and if you have a budget, I recommend getting some of these papers that I have here. I'll talk about this in a minute. First of all, something that is really common to purchase is Canson. I like this. I've even used it on a couple watercolor tutorials recently. And it is not cotton. Cotton is the professional paper, which is expensive. It's beautiful. It allows you to do really nice work, and it absorbs the paint in a way that makes it look very attractive. But this pulp paper works fine, especially for practice. So you can get this on Amazon. I will link all this stuff in the description as well. So that's one of my favorite sketchbooks. And then this one is by US Art Supply. And it's a nice size. Now it is not as thick as the Canson. The Canson is 140 pounds. This one I think is 110 pounds maybe. It's just talking about that thickness of the paper versus something much more thick like this one. It's going to hold up more to the water, especially if you're using a lot of watery mixes of paint and less pigment in your mixes. Now, I just wanted to show you guys this because I love this for just planning tutorials. So I will take this mixed media paper, which is great for sketching, and I will just sketch out my designs. And even sometimes, this is actually going to be a Patreon painting tutorial coming up in a couple weeks, or a week actually. Anyway, Patreon, free 7-day trial. I'm able to offer my exclusive tutorials and bonus content right now with a free trial if you want to try it out with no risk, and can cancel if you don't want to continue, or you can continue, either way. I paint over some of the tops of these. This was a Matisse painting that I decided to try out myself. What I like about this paper is that, and I draw with my kids sometimes, which is fun. What's great about it is that it's stress-free. It's just, for me, it's for planning, sketching, it's great. If you watercolor paint over the top, don't expect anything fancy, but it's really nice for practice and it doesn't stress you out. You don't feel like you're wasting. So this is a Stonehenge, Legion Stonehenge paper, and it is 100% cotton. It's beautiful, it's soft to the touch. My preferred one is Academy, which I'll get to in a moment. But for the price, I think it comes out to maybe $1 a sheet. This is a 9x12, which is pricey, but for a cotton paper, actually a really good deal. This one was sent to me by Hippie Crafter, and they were so generous to have me try it out. This is 140 pound. The one I just showed you, 140 pound as well. And what is nice about this one is the price. I think it was something like $23 for 2 of these packs when I checked the price online. So just a great, cheaper paper, pulp paper that works good for practice. Unless you're going to sell your artwork somewhere, you can use that kind of paper. Now, you won't see the same results as if you're using a 100% cotton paper like this. This is Academy. It's a 10x10. I like this size a lot. It's 140 pounds, and it's pretty affordable as well on Amazon for a professional paper. So this one is a bit more rough, scratchy, kind of like the Arche brand that you have out there too, versus the Stonehenge, which this one is a bit softer. So I do like this one because it has the scratchy surface and it has really nice texture. So you're going to get a lot of that texture coming through your paintings as you're putting that paint on the paper. What's nice about cotton is it absorbs it in a way that makes it look very beautiful and attractive. It doesn't soak that liquid right into the paper like if you were painting on a printer paper, for example. Okay, and just so you know, all the papers I've showed you have been cold press versus hot press, so they have that nice texture that I love in watercolor. These are the sketchbooks I get asked about the most when I do my little reels. These are by Tumuarta, and I get them on Amazon. I recently took a trip to Oahu in Hawaii, and I went to a different beach every day. or a side of the beach. So it might have been up the beach or down the beach. And I painted what I saw there. And for me, this was such therapy to be able to be out in nature, to be at the beach and put these scenes to paper. These sketchbooks are so nice because they are a small size and they come with this nice elastic to keep everything shut. This one is a 5x5. This one is a 3.5x5, I believe, a smaller size, but it's so nice to take it on the go to paint with you. And it's a 25% cotton, and then the rest is a pulp paper. I think it just has a really nice texture, and it has enough cotton that it really makes it fun to paint on. I want to show you real quick here. I did a video on different types of paper, and I will link it below so that you guys can check it out. And here's some examples of the papers that I painted on. I showed you what all these papers are, but the Hippie Crafter says that it's 50% cotton, but I haven't experienced it. It doesn't, as being a cotton or blend, it feels more like a pulp paper, but I could be wrong on that. So here's the thing, if you don't have a budget for cotton paper, then get a pulp paper, get one of those sketchbooks or the loose pieces. But you know what, for practice, I know people say often that you should use a cotton paper, and that's what I hear artists saying. If you have a budget, use what you can, use what you have. I just wanted to show you an example. You can paint on cardboard. You can paint on the back of a grocery bag if you want to, or printer paper. It's not going to look exactly the same. It's going to absorb into that paper because these papers have all been treated with something called sizing, which is usually a gelatin layer over the top that keeps the paper from completely absorbing the liquid and the paint quickly. It keeps it on the surface and just looks really beautiful. But if you're just trying to practice and you're afraid to waste supplies, or you don't have a big budget for supplies, guys, this is something that you can do. Paint on whatever you have. It's okay. It's going to be fine. Okay, so we're going to spray down our palette and get everything ready for painting again, because we're going to do 4 different types of washes. So I'm going to grab this brush. It's a number 12 round, and we're just going to kind of grab some paint that's on my palette. The first one we're talking about is a flat wash. I'm going to use a lot of water. We're going to need to paint a lot of space, and we're just going to go from the top to the bottom. I mean, you don't have to, but it's simply what it is, what it sounds like, a flat wash. So you're just going to take one watery color mix and you're going to paint it all the way down if you start from the top. And there's nothing fancy to this. So this is good when you're wanting to do a very simple background. A lot of times when I do florals, sometimes I will add a background. Actually, I don't do it very often, but sometimes I want to change it up. And sometimes I just leave the background white. But it can be nice to have a flat wash like this, and something that we can talk about tomorrow in tomorrow's video are blooms and how to create blooms. That's going to be texture in your watercolor, and adding in water here is going to make texture, but we don't want that. We want it to be flat and boring today. Okay, so the second one is to create a gradient wash. And so I'm going to grab some blue, and this might be nice for a sky. Actually, it would be nice for a sky. And so I'm going to take a pretty dark mix here. We're going to start at the top. We're going to start at the top here, and with a lot of nice dark pigment. And then I'm trying to get those edges, because I know some of you will be very bothered if I go outside the lines. And I'm going to go outside the lines. It's going to happen, and I'm not going to worry about it. But I'm just saying. So we're going to clean our brush in here, dip it in the clean water, and then we're going to take that water and we're going to start to bring that color down. Now, if you're looking at a sky, you're going to notice that the sky often has, if it's blue, it often is really dark at the top. And clean your brush, squeegee it off on the side, and bring that color down. So see how we're fading? We're getting lighter and lighter. And so you'll notice with the sky that you'll have a lot of darker color at the top, and then it slowly fades as it gets towards the bottom. So with this, we want to make sure that it's blended well. And I got to be careful, because if I add more water, I'm dabbing my brush. If I add too much water, it's going to create the textures and blooms. So I'm just kind of bringing that color down. And so we have a gradiated wash. or graded, yeah. And so we have really dark at the top, and then kind of medium in this midsection, and really light fading towards the bottom. So for the third wash we're going to create now is going to be a variegated wash. And this would be nice if you're doing a sunset, for example. We typically will do like a red or pink, an orange, and a yellow. So we're just going to do that. We're not worrying about fading it. We're just wanting to create those colors on there. And let me just add that there, kind of a pinkish red. There's some purple in there. We're just going to put the colors on there, and then we're going to go from one color to the next. And I don't want too much liquid on my brush because it's going to be just too watery, and the paint will move a lot more than I'm wanting. So I'm trying not to worry too much about these edges, guys. I'm sorry if it bothers you. I know sometimes it's like you just, when you're doing that paint by, or coloring books, that's what I'm going to say, you just want to keep within the lines. That's what they've taught us. But you know what? I've been trying to teach people it's okay if you go outside the lines. It's going to be okay. But we don't always realize that. I don't have too much of a mixing area here. I'm just going to take a little bit of water, add it in here, dab it, and then we're just going to start adding in from here. So we are mixing in some orange in with our red and just trying to kind of blend that the best that we can. And then we're going to add in our yellow and end with that one. So I can just dip in here, and our yellow is our lightest one. It's really hard to go dark with yellow, just the way that the pigment is. And so sometimes you just have to really dig into the actual pan itself and grab that color. So we're just blending here, kind of going back and forth between the yellow and the orange. Well, we're not gonna, went outside the line. See, this is a good therapy for all of us to be able to be okay with imperfection. Because this is just a demonstration of the colors. We're not going for any perfect demo today. Okay, I'm gonna clean my water and I'll be right back for the wet on wet. For this last one, wet on wet, it's not considered necessarily one of these, kind of the classic one of these three washes, but I'll explain it further. So we're going to paint this rectangle with some fresh water right here. And the reason why I'm calling it a wash, well, it's a wash in a way because we can use this for a background. And that's what we use our washes for. A lot of times our background situation, our sky, sometimes the ground or the sea water. And we're just going to wet that up. We don't want puddles here. I don't know if you can see, there is a sheen on my paper right here. And so I don't know if you can see that, but that's going to tell me that it's about wet enough. I don't have a pool. That's going to make it challenging to do what we want to do. So now I'm just going to take some of this blue paint and I'm going to drop it in different areas, and it's going to spread. Look at how fun that is. Kind of looks like fireworks. And so this could be something you do for your sky. I'm not necessarily doing a sky today. I just want to show you how this paint will spread. And if you dip into your thick paint here, you can see a little bit more of that. As this starts to dry, this is going to be more of a damp on wet situation. So you have wet water or wet paint, wet paint or water on your page, and then you add more wet to it. It's going to create these blooms. That's a really fun effect. The next thing we're going to talk about is layering paint. I call it layering paint. What we're talking about is wet on dry, and wet on damp. So we did a wet on wet example, but I want to just do all these three together. We'll do another one just to show you. So we're going to fix our paper so that it's going to be the wet on damp, meaning we're going to color in this circle with the water. It's a little tinted from our pigment, and we're going to let it sit for a little bit until it's not super wet, it's just damp. I want to do the wet on dry. It's called glazing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my paint here, and I'm just going to make sure that it's pretty runny, it's pretty light. You don't have to have a lot of pigment. You can actually dab your brush. But the point is that you have a lot of water ratio to paint, so that if we glaze over the top, we do a layer when this is dry, we can actually see the layer underneath, and it's going to affect how it looks. So I'm just going to take off some of this. This is another technique called lifting paint. We're not necessarily talking about today, but that's what I'm doing. So you can just take a clean, damp brush, and lift off color. So we're going to let this dry, And then, actually, we'll let it dry as we do our wet on wet. So we're gonna do one more. I'm just going to paint this with that water, and it's nice and pink now, so you can really see it show up. And then we're just gonna drop in more color. I'm just gonna take some from here and see how that looks. And if we have more water, the more water we have on our paper and in our paint, the more this is gonna spread. So I don't have that much on here. I'm gonna add a little bit more, make it more runny, and we're gonna see if things are gonna move here. So we have some cute little blooms that are forming depending on how much water is in each section. And that can be a fun, cool texture in and of itself. So now we have our paper, it is damp. I'm not sure how much movement we're gonna get, but we're just going to experiment with some of this orange. So I'm gonna take that and dab it in. And I want you to see, it doesn't move much, but it does move some. There's some blooms that are forming. So there might be times where you want to do this kind of effect, but you don't want as much spreading happening. And so you wait until your paper is fairly dry. So wet on damp would be this technique here. All right, so I'm gonna come back in a moment when this is dry and we'll do our glazing. Now we're gonna do some glazing over this. I'm gonna take some of my yellow paint and I'm just going to do a little bit here. I'm gonna put a line in the middle so you can see the difference and just paint over the top here. So for glazing, you want to do this for layers. Sometimes if you're doing some type of details over your object, you're going to want to do a very light shade and you can still see a very light value and you can still see through that paint to the pink underneath. Now, if I do a thicker version of this, which you can totally do, you're not going to get as much of that under layer, that underpainting showing through, but it still does affect the color of this yellow, because if I were to paint it here on the side, you can see it's a lot brighter and lighter, and this one is more toned down because it has that pink underneath. So the last thing I want to do with you guys is talk about stippling, dry brush, and then also splatter. Now, splatter is one of my favorites, and I will save that for the end. It's a bit messy, it's going to get everywhere, but that's okay. So stippling is simply doing little dots. So for example, if I make flowers, I like to stipple in the center of the flower. So I just take my brush and I make these tiny little marks right here. And this is what stippling is, okay? Just little tiny dots. You can press down more and create larger dots, but this is gonna be your stippling effect. And if you go slow, you're gonna have probably more of those controlled marks versus if you go really fast. They may not be as precise or whatever. And if you do thicker paint, then you will really see those stand out versus really watery paint. They might smudge together. Just wanted to check in on our wet on wet here. As an example, if you want your paint to stay put, do a lot less water on your brush with your pigment, okay? If you do a lot of water in that paint and you add it, especially if it's already wet, you're gonna get a lot of spreading, which we did here. It's doing what it's supposed to do, spreading, but it definitely would use less water next time if you want to keep those little dots. But for me, I just wanted to add in the little bits of color, dropping in that color just to see what it would do in the wet versus the damp areas. Okay, so the next one we're gonna do is dry brushing. Dry brushing is so fun. I love to use it when it comes to landscapes, for the ground, for example. So I'm gonna dip into the paint pan here. I'm going to dab on my paper towel to get off some of that liquid, and I'm just going to dry brush, and I'm gonna dab a little bit more. As you can see, we're getting a really nice texture here because this paintbrush is so dry that it is skipping along some of the texture and leaving some spaces white. Super easy, really great for your landscapes, for the ground, and you can even do some in the trees for foliage or on the bark of your tree as well. Last but not least, we're doing splatter. I'm gonna take a really watery mix of paint here, load up my brush, I'm gonna make a mess, and we're going to tap. It's gonna go everywhere. It's not gonna stay in the circle, but that's okay. And that's simply it. So if you do some flowers and you want to have some lovely kind of pollen floating around, it's a great way to make it pretty. I'm so glad that you joined me for the video on painting today. Tomorrow, we're gonna be doing two things. First of all, we're going to be doing a little bit of the color wheel and some color mixing strategies. And then second, we're going to be playing around with textures in watercolor, using some random household supplies we might not normally use in a professional painting, but when we're playing with watercolor, it's fun to see what all these products can do. So I'll see you on the next video, day 4.